Yo guys, what is up? Welcome back for yet another episode of the Off-Grid podcast. Tried something new the other day, It's a half pint tour on a hike. So we're talking 12 miles and then all those quirky little pubs that you see and don't usually go to. Just pop in, have a little half pint, talking 20 minutes, nice chat, and then back out. Keep it walking, keep it going. I did 12 miles over the course of what was about an 8-hour day in the end. So yeah, absolutely loved it. Let's make it a thing. Let's make this a trending topic. Let's hashtag that, TikTok it, at me in the comments. You guys know the drill. All right, guys, this week's guest is with Mr. Henry Brydon. Henry rode a bike from London to Sydney over the course of 2 years when he was just 25 years old, and now he is the founder of We Are Explorers and Outside Kids, where he wants to give children adventure in their lives. In this conversation, we talk about the quarter-life crisis we feel in our 20s, ending up in an Iraqi prison, the difference in culture and lifestyle between Australia and the UK, bringing up outdoor-loving children in a tech-dominated world, and how to live life to the max and get excited about England. Henry is on an awesome mission, one for our next generation and for this country, and I'm all for it. Hope you guys absolutely love this one. On with the podcast. Henry, welcome to the Off-Grid podcast, mate. Good to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me on, Jake. Really excited to jump on and have a yarn.
Yeah, mate. Looking forward to getting into this one because you've got layers to you, and I want to start on like sort of like the middle layer. So start off when you were 25, because when you're 25, it seems to be like a point in your life that your trajectory of your life completely changed. So I wanted to start there and first ask, who was that 25-year-old self back then when you were working in the city?
Well, yeah, that was a massive like moment in my life for sure. And I think when I look back, I think that was probably the biggest moment. And I'm so pleased that it happened. And I'm so pleased that I went with my gut at that time. So what happened? I think I'd got to 25 and in a nutshell, had an overwhelming sense that this was not the right path that I was on. And that voice had steadily got louder in the years preceding. And, I think I thought I just was doing what needed to be done. And before you know it, you're 25 and you're like, fuck, unless I actually take some agency here and listen to that voice and do what I actually want to do, then I could totally see myself getting to 41, which is how old I am now, and live with regret, which is just the worst thing to be eating away inside of you. So yeah, basically, long story short, I decided that I was going to do the trip I wanted to do, which was basically a bike ride around the world. And, I'd read some books about some really impressive people who'd done that, Al Humphreys being a major inspiration. And I thought, Christ, I don't think I could do that. But the way that he had framed it made it seem like a very accessible thing to do. Like I didn't have to be a superhero to do it. And that was really appealing. But yeah, basically threw 2 sheets to the wind and bought the bike and then headed east when I was 25 and had a loose plan to get to Sydney.
Wow. And 2 years later, that sounded like you ended up having quite the ride out there through the world. What was that kind of, if we could go back to just before setting off, what was the build up to that? It sounds like it was kind of a point in your life where you're unhappy. What was it you were looking for from that trip?
Yeah. So I think, so at the time I'd gone to university, I'd followed, the road to London where the streets are paved with gold, supposedly. And I got myself into a recruitment job and then ended up moving to Dubai, and I was doing recruitment over there at the time. And yeah, rather fortuitously for me anyway, the global financial crisis struck. And yeah, as I said, whilst that was terrible for a lot of people, for me at the time, it basically gutted the market that I was working within. And so, together with these desires to do this big trip, the world was basically saying, now's the time to hit that escape button and go for it. And so, yeah, I think my intentions were to chase that adventure, make the most of this time, and use it as an opportunity to, yeah, find out a bit more about what I'm capable of. And you know what? Actually, do something for the first time in my life that I wanted to do that was entirely my doing. Like that was a really powerful feeling, to set off from London and have had complete control over that decision. Like no one else had had anything to do with that. Obviously there have been people that have said, probably don't do that. That's a bad idea. This is a time in your life to double down and find out, what kind of profession you should be focusing on, all the rest of it. But, I sort of basically put the two fingers up to that and said, I'm going to do this my way. And that was a really liberating feeling. And like, I think that sense of accomplishment, even just in setting off, was massive. But to have then actually, had this crazy trip over those 2 years, through I think it was 30 countries in the end, about nearly 40,000 Ks. By the time I got to Australia and had completed this thing, like it was almost like a superpower, that sense of like, well, fuck, if I can do that, like what else can I do? And I think for anyone at any stage in your life, that's a really strong feeling. But I think particularly when you're in your 20s, when you've still got so much of your life to lead and so much follows, then it's something that is really valuable. And that trip, has really, set me up, I think, mentally for the rest of, where I've got to so far in terms of, how I've decided to lead my life. So life-changing trip.
Yeah. And a long period of time to sort of spend with yourself and just be totally free in the world, which is the ultimate gift. I went traveling 2 years ago for a year, just backpacking around Asia. And that sense of freedom is just like no other. You just wake up, do what you want, go where you want. If you want to change plans and get a flight to a different country, you can. It was amazing. How did that 25-year-old guy change? If you could summarize how that person had changed over that period, what happened to that young man?
Yeah. I think aside from that sense of anything's possible, which is, as I said, like a powerful feeling, I think it's just like, it sort of hardwires you, that sort of trip, to lean in to risk, adventure, living adventurously. The idea that, even if you don't really know, this sounds almost cheesy the way I frame it, but if you don't really know what's around the corner, like it's worth being curious enough to give it a nudge and see what's there. Like, not knowing what the outcome might be isn't something that necessarily like scares me anymore. In fact, it sort of turns me on a little bit, like the idea of like, I actually don't know where this is going to take me. Let's strap in and see where we go. I think it's been quite a fun way to lead up because off the back of that trip, there's been all sorts of other, big, moments where you have to make decisions, and like decisions can be, we make hundreds of them every day, and big ones and seemingly small ones at the time actually become quite big decisions. But, I think if a mentality going into decision making is one of like, well, what's the worst that could happen? I think inevitably that's going to lead to some fruity outcomes. So yeah, I think that was probably a mentality that I had post trip that wasn't there necessarily, before. Embracing like adventure, I think is probably the big shift.
There's one thing that happened in that whole 2 years that I've got to talk about, because there's so much more we got to talk about after. But the one thing I wanted to ask about that trip was ending up in an Iraqi prison.
Oh yeah.
What happened there?
Yeah. So So it's not as bad as it sounds immediately, but yeah, it was a bit of a dicey one. So yeah, so it was me and another guy, well, he wasn't even a friend when I set off. He was just someone I was introduced to about 3 months before, who I kind of sense checked on one night out, and I thought, I think he's someone I could do a trip with. But really, when we got into the shared tent on the first night leaving London, I was like, this could go one of two ways. Uh, but it turns out the gamble was worth it. I rolled the dice in it, and it worked. He's like godfather to my kid now, and he married me and my wife, and he's like my best mate. Jamie lives on the side of a mountain in Portugal now, and he's someone you should have a chat with as well at some point. But anyway, so we set off, and yeah, we had all sorts of crazy stuff happen on that trip, and one of them was, well, we got robbed a few times, and actually often, in fact, we always got robbed when we had been drinking. So if there's one lesson I can share with listeners, which probably they would understand this anyway, is, be careful when you're drinking, because you often let your guard down, right? And you embrace people more readily, and you don't do the same, sense checks on people. Anyway, so we were rocking up into, we just finished riding across Iraq, which, was insane. And the last night was obviously prior to getting to Iran, and we knew we weren't going to have a drink for a couple of months. And don't get me wrong, we weren't absolute booze hounds, but we did enjoy a drink. So we saw a bottle shop right at the border town because we missed the crossing. And we saw a bottle shop, and we're like, we'll just get a bottle of whiskey and a few beers, and we'll just camp, a bit further back, and then we'll cross over in the morning when it reopens. Now, I think the people that we bought the booze from were probably not the most savory of characters. But yes, we backtracked, we pitched up, we toasted to like this amazing tour of Iraq that we'd had. And I just remember passing out. And the next thing I remember is waking up in our tent with Jamie literally lying on me, snoring. And I was like, that's weird. The tent flap, like the door is like flapping. It was a really, really windy night. And the tent door was flapping. I was like, shit, did we forget to close the tent? So I opened up the sort of inner vestibule bit, and where we put all our stuff, and all of our stuff was gone. Like there was nothing there. I was like, I could have sworn we put all our stuff in here last night. Anyway, long story short, someone had been watching us from afar, watched us drink ourselves into oblivion, pass out. And then when we were passed out, they came in and basically took everything out of our tent and had emptied everything out and just taken anything of value. They hadn't taken the bikes or our passports, and our cash we'd stuffed in dirty socks, which was a really good recommendation that someone gave us.
Wow.
But we'd basically lost all our technical gear, loads of stuff, thousands of dollars worth of stuff, cameras, like our little laptop that we had. And so we went to report that to the local police officer, who, rather than kind of coming to our aid, the officers there decided to sort of almost like make a mockery of it, and just sort of have fun with the fact that these foreigners had been screwed. And which was a real shame. And they ended up, rather than like looking after us, they put us into the prison cell for a night, and kind of abandoned us there basically. And rather than helping, we left to our own devices until we basically made enough noise that they let us out, and we got moving. But we didn't get the police note that we needed to claim on insurance. We didn't get any of our stuff back. They didn't try and find the perpetrators. They just said, on your way, basically. So it's kind of messed up. But for a while there, it was like, is this the end of the trip? Like, are we going to be, here for, the remainder of the trip? Who knew? It was definitely panic stations for a while there.
Wow. So you end up going to the police station to ask for help, and you end up in a prison cell.
Yeah. It was sort of, not what I was expecting, Jake.
Wow. Well, what a ride. And then you got to Australia, spent 10 years there. So
yeah,
hope you ended up loving it. You started the We Are Explorers business. And I mean, one thing I actually find with Australia at the moment is like loads of young people in England seem to be leaving for Australia for the outdoors lifestyle, and going on a run club at 5 a.m. and surfing. And I've never been, so I don't know what it's like out there, but people seem to go for lifestyle reasons more than anything else. What did you make of Australia, and how did it sort of compare to English culture in relation to like outdoor living and adventure?
Yeah, I think the thing that you become very aware of living in Oz is just how accessible the outdoors is over there. Like, it's accessible here, but you have to work a little bit harder in the UK. Things are a little bit trickier to get to. The roads are a little bit busier. The weather's generally working a bit against you here. So there's like certain factors that seem to, conspire to make it a little bit harder over here. Whereas over there, you've got these major cities dotted around, but even in Sydney, which is obviously one of the biggest cities, you can be in the bush within like 45 minutes from the CBD, by just hopping on a train and basically zooming down south to the Royal National Park, for example, up to Ku-ring-gai National Park is about 40 minutes. And you can be in bush where there's kangaroos, snakes, koalas, like you name it, they're all there. So like, and of course the weather's working generally for you. There obviously is extremes in weather in Australia, which is kind of freaky. We actually lost our house in a flood, but that's a separate story. It's extreme over there, but in terms of the lifestyle, it's just so easy to plug into, an adventurous lifestyle. And that was sort of the foundation for starting We Are Explorers, which is basically like this, digital media brand, a community, an outdoor community, which is all about getting people outdoors more. Because when I got to Australia, we were actually planning on basically saving money and then going over to Packraft in South America I wanted to be a hobo for the rest of my life. I was absolutely happy as a pig and poo. But, I basically met my wife on the very first day in Sydney at a house party. And yeah, I think it was a combination of not realizing how much I wanted to stop. And of course, like I'm sure Susie's listening to it, how wonderful, she was. But, it was, I basically stayed in Sydney and it was in looking for things to do around Sydney that there didn't seem to be a platform that really celebrated all the accessible adventures you can have, around the cities in Australia, which is really weird because it's Australia. Surely everyone knows there's so much to do there. So yeah, I started that in 2014, and that's what kind of kept me busy, and that's why I ended up staying. And then by virtue of running a business that's focused around getting outdoors, it meant that I had this really wonderful lifestyle as well, where I was working in an area finally that I was really passionate about. Whereas like the 25-year-old me was like, I didn't think that was really possible, but it absolutely is. And so yeah, that sort of determined like the next sort of big chapter of my life, really.
When I went traveling, there was a big sense of me that wanted to go somewhere, but then there was maybe even a bigger sense of wanting to leave somewhere. And at the time that I left England, I was so disenfranchised by England. I just didn't want to be here. And I couldn't think of like what else I would do. I just felt like this inner urge. I was like, I need adventure. I've got to travel. I need to leave here. For you, obviously spending what ended up being a decade in Australia, was there this part of you that felt like you wanted to leave England behind at that time?
Mate, it's funny because, we were there long enough to get passports. My kids are Aussies, essentially. It's funny, I was watching a video just a couple of weeks ago of the kids when we were in Australia, and I didn't realize, but they were full-blown Aussies. Like the way they talk, I was like, Jesus, get them into some elocution lessons immediately. But yeah, like we loved Australia, and I haven't got a bad word to say about the place. It was magic. But there was, I never felt like, I always felt like a Brit in Australia. I always felt like we were going to move back to the UK at some point. And there's lots of reasons why. Thankfully, Susie, had very similar motivations too. We've got big families and we want to be spending more time with them. But also like, yes, the UK has like some major challenges, but it's a magical place. And there's so much great things to do in this country. And in fact, being away for it for so long only made that yearning to see more of the UK, let alone mainland Europe, but the UK, it only increased that appetite to do more over here. So like, to be honest, like moving back to the UK, it was like, yes, I knew I was going to miss Australia. It was great there, but like, Jesus, like there's so much to do in the UK. Let's go, and it's only now that I'm back in with this quite a different, kind of outlook on things, that I'm looking at the map of the UK and I'm just like, shit, like where do we start? Like there's so much to do here, And so that's a great feeling. And yeah, like we've already given it a red hot crack, and yeah, we've mapped out a year of stuff to do as a family this year, and it's, we'll barely touch the sides, but there's just so much to do here.
Mate, that really warms my heart.
Mm,
That is so cool to hear, because I feel
mm,
like at the moment, you can only really hear bad things about what's
yeah,
happening in England. I think it's also part of the culture, sort of quite
yeah,
pessimistic culture, and sort of like kind of a bit down about things. But I
mm,
completely agree that more time spent away, you then realize how awesome the country is. What were those like few things that
mm,
got you psyched for England when you were on that flight back? You're like, oh yeah, England,
yeah.
let's go. Like, what were those few things you were looking forward to?
Yeah, man, I miss the people like massively. I always remember like when we came back for holidays from Australia back to the UK for a couple of weeks. And as soon as you like, it's even like the first encounter that you have with like, a train conductor. And there's just like the immediate quirk and banter that you get at a train station. You're like, it's so good. So I miss, and that's just like, that's just the general public. But like, of course, I miss like family. I couldn't wait to spend more time with I've got three brothers, and their wives are all spitting out babies like it's nobody's business at the moment. And I wanted to get back into the, into the sort of nest, if you like. So I was really excited about the family side of things. Yeah, I miss the pubs, obviously. But yeah, I think it was, we had this like really interesting decision to make, because we could move anywhere in the UK, and it was almost a bit overwhelming, because we know that we want to live this, our value set as a family now is very much about living closely to nature, prioritizing our kids, and and kind of showing our children how we want to do things. And that for us seemed like it was like in a nature pocket of the UK. And so we were looking at West Wales. We were going to like maybe buy a farm, and then we realized we couldn't afford to buy a farm. And then we started looking at like, Devon and Cornwall. That was maybe too far away. And so I remember like coming the plane over, it was really excited to be back, but it was also sort of a sense of shit, like, the sort of the world or the country's our oyster. Like where do we go? And we knew it was sort of setting ourselves up for this next big chapter of our lives. And it was sort of that same sense of like that same decision-making process of like, shit, like this is a big decision, but it's almost like, let's just go with the flow. Let's go with somewhere. It might not be the perfect place to start with, but let's go where it feels good, And actually looking at the map, like we wanted to be close to civilization. So like, and the West Country seemed like the most natural fit for someone coming from Australia, like a little bit more laid back as you head to west in the UK. And then we just saw this big splodge of green just above Bristol. And it was like, Forest of Dean, what's that? Like we've never been here before. And it just looked pretty magic, and it was kind of a bit more affordable than other parts of the UK. And bish bash bosh, here we go. Here we are.
Awesome. Really cool. It's that like a continued sense of adventure, just
Yeah.
in like a very different way that's kind of more rooted around family and being near friends.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's it. And we knew it was going to be really hard. I mean, I knew that come November in the UK is pretty challenging. And so I almost pre-booked my appointment with a mental health practitioner in advance. Keep yourself free on 1st November, mate. We need to have a deep chat. And then sure enough, literally the 1st of November, it was like, what have we done? Because of course I just set for myself more the WhatsApp groups in Australia. I just didn't need to hear about, the workouts my mates were doing in Byron Bay where we were living. And, I was like, no, I don't need to know about this anymore. But yeah, no, we worked through the teething challenges, and we don't regret it at all, man. We're really, really enjoying it. And I think as with everything, it's a mindset, thing. And I think if you look at the UK and you see past some of those challenges, as we mentioned, like, there's some really wonderful things about this country. And, if you're into adventure, it's literally a playground for it. So yeah, I can't wait to do more.
How would you describe that mindset? Because what's interesting is you came back to the same country. I mean,
Mm,
maybe some things have probably changed in a decade, but it really is still England.
mm,
But you're now the eyes that look out to see the world have now changed
mm,
somewhat, and your perspective has shifted.
mm.
How would you describe that change in perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think compare it to 25. Like you only really know what you know. And I'm a big believer, which I think you are, having, listened to, other shows and hearing your story, other shows that you've done, other interviews, is that, travel is the big mind opener. And, by getting out there and not just seeing places, but meeting all sorts of different people, locals and other travelers, like you start to get a sense of, kind of what's possible. And so I think, fast forward, 15 years or whatever it was, now I'm back. Like I think, don't get me wrong, like this, I only know what I know still, but what I am more confident of is that, the possibilities that exist in the world, and probably my ability to show up and, you know, meet some of those opportunities and jump on them. And so I think that's probably the big one is, in a nutshell would be, an open-mindedness and a sense of perspective and possibility that I think the 25-year-old me just didn't feel. I felt more, unaware and probably pigeonholed, I think, into, what I was capable of. And so travel really changed the game there for me, I think.
Yeah, I think a lot of people around that age group can relate to that idea of just you mentioned earlier, following the path that's set out for you. It's like go to
Mm,
school, go to college,
mm,
get your degree, and get the grad role, and
yeah.
slowly climb your way up the ladder. I think it's only at about age 25 that you sort of have this maybe a quarter life crisis, and you're just like,
Mm,
oh shit, you're now out of the education system. You
mm,
don't have like the letter A to your name to say that you're doing well. You're just a bit
yeah.
sort of you're in the world, but you're in the big wide world now. There's no institution to sort of put you in your role within society, and you're just like, oh shit, what do I do? And I've got bills to pay, and what the hell is going on? It can be a scary time.
Yeah.
It can also be fun and liberating because I would imagine maybe if you're looking back at your 25-year-old self, it's like, wow, you can take your life anywhere you want to go, and you can
Mm,
just roll with it
mm,
and set your course and get after it. But was there a part of you that can sort of relate to that sort of
yeah.
youthful scaredness at the world and what the hell to do?
Yeah, 100%. I think you described that really well. I think it is kind of scary because I think now more than ever we are aware through, you know, being online that, there's a awesome opportunities out there in the world, but it's just scary because you don't really know, what to focus on. There's a panic that, there's a sense of panic around, oh, I've got to make the right decision now. The thing I do now will determine the rest of my life. And, of course that's not true. Like you just, the best way to approach it, I think, is to just start something. And it's amazing how things evolve over time. And especially if being someone who is up for having a chat with people and, being open-minded to opportunities, like God, life can spin off in so many different directions that you never thought possible at 25. It's just taking that step, isn't it? And moving forward, having that forward momentum and then, the good times will follow.
Yeah, absolutely. It could be a myriadic maze, but you can make it fun. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Um, okay, when you came back to the UK, you came back with your two children. So
Yeah.
your son and your daughter, and you're looking for what's now the family home, and you're on to the sort of the next adventure in life and starting outside kids. What's the story behind that, and what was it about you that had maybe changed
Mm.
becoming a dad?
Mm. Yeah. It was like, I don't know. I wasn't really sure exactly what to do when I moved back. I mean, I'm still running We Are Explorers. That's still rolling. That's still, our main income, and that's something I'm still really proud of and I'm involved in. The natural step felt like, okay, well, I should just do We Are Explorers over here in the UK. And, if anything, people need adventure, more over here for those reasons that we talked about. But the idea of just doing the same thing and maybe having those same challenges just didn't really excite me, you know. And I wanted to sort of be a bit more. If I was going to do something in the media world again, I wanted to, be a bit more laser focused. Where Explorers is a brilliant general overarching platform that is essentially saying everyone should just get outside more. But the way I see media going is is needing to be a little bit more focused and a bit more niche. And I also didn't want to build a team with lots of staff and things like that. So I kind of looked at where I was at in my life, and, you know, it also coincided with some really big cultural moments that I think, you know, we're having at the moment, which is, you know, becoming abundantly clear that devices can be super dangerous for kids. And whilst I'm not purely anti-tech and anti-devices, I think there needs to be some pretty significant like guardrails put around it, because I think they are built to be addictive and can be, I think, really dangerous for kids. And I think there's a big national kind of, or global, you know, movement and conversation happening around that now. And Australia have been at the forefront of that with, you know, banning social media for, you know, kids under 16. And I think there's the smartphone free movement over here in the UK, and hopefully other countries will follow suit with social media. But yeah, there's a lot of conversation around, you know, devices being dangerous. And ultimately the outdoors is the antithesis of that. You know, it's the antidote to that, I should say, as well. So there's a lot of conversation around that. Also, I'm a dad. And so, you know, I also see the role that we play as parents, but particularly as dads, in being that guide into helping kids, you know, spend more time outside. And so, and the nature of dads, the roles that dads play is changing. You know, it wasn't long ago that we were basically, you know, tasked with providing, and the providing was largely focused around, you know, that really important financial support for the home, right? And my dad's generation is very much like caught within that. And that's why we still have really interesting conversations with me and dad, because it's like he's wired kind of differently. And I think whilst he kind of, you know, I think respects and admires whatever the way that I'm doing things, it's really different. It's intrinsically different. And that role is, I think, really exciting for dads. Like we're now playing a much stronger role in the way that, you know, we raise our children. And so put all these things together, I was like, well, I think that's probably where I should focus it, is like getting kids outside more. So, and helping, you know, basically helping dads like do that essentially. And so that's really the message behind it. It's been going for 6 months. It's a newsletter at the moment that I send out once a week, every Wednesday at 10, outsidekids.co.uk, for those that want to sign up. And yeah, it's basically just making adventure and raising adventurous kids, I think, accessible for everyone without having to be, you know, hardcore. It's like, how can you interweave, like bring adventure into the everyday, you know, and micro adventure obviously being a really big part of that. How can we help kids, you know, think about protecting nature from a really early age? Like, let's hardwire them to be custodians early. And yeah, I think I've got a voice that might help, you know, to sort of like facilitate some of that change. So that's kind of what I'm focusing on at the moment. And it's really fun. Like, I'm really enjoying being back on the tools. I'm enjoying writing. I'm enjoying, you know, building that network in the UK from scratch again, and talking to lots of really interesting people like yourself about like why this is important. And like, you know, let's like get kids outside more, essentially.
What was that upbringing like with your dad when you were a boy?
Yeah, like I think I certainly never felt like I was like starved of like adventure. You just go with the flow. It's only when I look back, I was like, oh, actually, yeah, we never really went and did like wild camping or anything like that. We used to do, you know, we had a caravan and we'd go on caravan trips, and we'd go to North Wales, or, you know, we'd go down to France or Spain on the like caravan trips. But I think mum and dad were probably doing that more because like at the time, financially, that was like the most affordable way to do things. Like even when mum talks about caravan trips he did as kids now, like I don't think it was necessarily like, I don't know if they loved it necessarily. But yeah, I grew up with like 3 brothers. So one of them was my identical twin. So like, you know, we just needed a garden and a tree. Like we could have just had the best, you know, the best adventures there, you know? So I think, you know, we're all built to be like very playful people. Like that's just the way we're programmed. And I think whilst mum and dad did offer that to an extent, like, you know, I've had to sort of almost like unlock that more myself as I've got older, and the influences that I've had. We did do one. I remember we had this amazing road trip in the States. It was one of the times we did like an overseas trip, went over to the States. We did a road trip. I must have been like 11, and we were driving through like the Badlands in South Dakota and all these places. I remember that moment being like, whoa, there's like a big world out there to explore. I remember that being, and I just couldn't stop. I can still remember it really vividly now. Like it was a really big trip for me. I was like, wow, there's like a big world to get out there and see. So I think, you know, they definitely created some wonderful like memories, but I think the adventure has had to be sort of almost like created like myself, really.
I feel like somewhat removed or detached from parenting because I'm at the age where I'm kind of just friends with my parents, whereas it's
Mm.
less of that kind of son
Mm.
dynamic with the parents.
Mm.
But also, my friends haven't yet started having children. So in
Mm.
my life and my network, I'm not around it at all.
Yeah.
But when I look at parenting today, it looks petrifying because it almost feels like getting children outdoors and, you know, giving them that kind of instinct to go into
Mm.
nature, to want to do it rather than like having to
Yeah.
do it. It almost seems like that friction with the world where, you know, you want them to kind of to survive at school, which is fucking brutal for anyone, and to kind of somewhat fit in with society as well. But then when you look at society and the way that things are going, it's all heavily indoors and to do with tech. Um, how
Yeah,
do
man.
you deal with that?
Yeah. It's, you know, we live in an age of convenience, right? So it's all about tap, swiping, one clicks, you know, same day delivery, all that stuff. And, you know, I think society's smoothing out everything for us. And it's almost like it's on this quest to make life really comfortable. And but we know that like meaning doesn't lie in the comfort. You know, it's something that we need to like model for the kids ourselves. And I really think the outdoors is the perfect like classroom for that. You know, it's the perfect way that you can introduce that friction, uh, but like good friction. You know, because you know friction's where, you know, when things go wrong, that's the good stuff. You know, that's the stuff where we can actually, you know, learn from and develop that grit and like the resilience, and that's really, I think, missing in a lot of kids' lives. And I think if we can, the more that we can do that from an early age, not through saying go outside and go and do more of those adventures, but as parents doing it with them and showing them this is how you can do it. Like kids learn not from just being told what to do; they just literally look up to their, you know, their carers, often the parents, and if they're doing it, and better still, if they're enjoying it, that's how that's contagious, and that's where kids start to go, you know what, this is good. This is, you know, adventure is good friction in disguise, basically. And so, yeah, I'm trying to do that as much as I can with my kids, and I'd love to do it. I'd love to do it more. And sometimes we win, and sometimes we lose. I don't want people listening to this to think for a second that we get it right every time, because we really don't. It goes wrong a lot. But you know, uh, we are doing our best to, you know, present these like amazing opportunities for our kids to, you know, have these experiences, and also make the most of this amazing time that we have as parents. Like parenting is, I think we often forget it, but like parenting is such a privilege to have. You know, I've got friends who struggle to have kids even though they want them. Like we've got these two, you know, amazing feral, but perfectly, you know, perfect kids, and they're at this age now. Like Luna's 6 and Jet's 8. You know, it's such a good age because they're so much more resilient and sort of robust, and you can do so much more for those early years. You can still get out there and do stuff. And you know, I urge, you know, go camping as early as you can with kids and do this sort of stuff. But when they get to the age where they can really communicate and kind of push it a little bit harder, you can start to do overnighters. You can start to, you know, do some really fun stuff. And then before you know it, they think we're losers, and and they're off with their mates doing their own trips to the Brecons or whatever it is. And so, you know, and of course, hopefully, you know, you've built up a strong enough relationship. I hope we are where, you know, they'll always want to adventure with their dad, no matter how sort of uncool he is. But you know, there is this window where they're kind of trapped, where they can't go and do their stuff with their mates, but they're capable of doing so much, and that's the time to capitalize. And I just don't want to squander that time, and I don't want other dads or parents to squander that time either. So, you know, if there's a way that I can inspire people to to maybe give it a go and not be intimidated by this sort of stuff, then I'm all for it.
So there are three things that I've noticed through reading about outside kids and researching for this that I've picked up that you said good for children that I really just want to hear more on. So first, you just mentioned it's discomfort and friction.
Mm.
Why is discomfort, why is that a good thing for a child? And what do you mean by creating friction for your children?
Yeah, but I think discomfort is just something that, as I said, we're removing from kids' lives. And, to hark back to like where devices, come in, and technology, I think it's being designed to create that comfort. And that is the, for many kids, that is how they are communicating more and more with the world. And so, I think it's really important to present these ways in which children are kind of torn away from those, from that way of thinking, and placed into, environments where they have to not have that control, in free play, and that starts from a really early age. Like that starts from, the playground. It starts from, parents being okay with letting them head off to the playground and muck around in an unstructured way, where yes, there might be a time limit to come home, but go and make up some fun yourself. I think that's never been more important, mate. And we've lost that as a society. It was only sort of 40 or 50 years ago where, parents that was just the normal thing to do. But now, there's all these threats, supposed threats, that prevent that sort of thing happening. And parents are just, terrified that things are going to go wrong. And, I don't know if you've come across the book, I think Jonathan Haidt. I don't know if I can't say his name. Jonathan Haidt. He wrote a book called The Anxious Generation, which really delves into this topic, and he essentially talks about the decline in that unsupervised free range play is super dangerous, and he presents some really interesting ways to, as a society, to start thinking about reapproaching that, and almost a call to arms for parents in particular to change the way that we're doing things. Like it's super important, man.
Second up is good for kids is boredom and doing nothing. Why is that important for kids?
Yeah, I think once again, it's like, boredom's where the good stuff comes from. I think, and I see it with my children. I can relate to this so much, the amount of times, like if I had a quid for every time I hear, I'm bored, and it's like, you've literally got, inside there's games to play, outside there's, a garden to play, there's a football goal, there's trees to climb. We live in a freaking forest. There's so much to do. And yet again, we always hear it. It's like, I'm bored, but it's painful to hear. But what I am noticing is that they are getting better. Like there's that I'm bored moment, and then it's soon followed by, okay, well, mum and dad aren't going to come to the rescue here and give me something to do. I have to figure this out for myself. And I think just training that muscle to, find that relief of boredom and create a game. And it's amazing. And then, and they do. And, often I'll just be like, oh, where are the kids? And then you'll look outside and they've come up with some crazy game involving like, a couple of planks of wood and some leaves. And it's like, what, it's just their imagination has allowed them to, kind of prosper and figure out, a solution to boredom. And so rather than filling that boredom void with just like, something that the parents give them, which is sometimes a device or whatever, or just supervision, it's like, no, let them figure it out themselves.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. Just that's a great sense of creativity, just to think to yourself that you need to create your own fun, because there is no theatre, cinema, or stimulus on a screen that's going to entertain you and do that fun for you. I grew up in a small village, which was like a playground. I just grew up in like full of nature and everything. I remember my dad was chopping logs one day, and I just used them as jumps for my scooters. We'd set up like an assault course. No one could drive on the road anymore because it was just this scooter assault course with logs everywhere. And even now, it's a great skill to have as you get into your adult life to to just be there and be like, okay, we're going to have fun. We're going to create a game.
Yeah.
We're going to entertain ourselves and be loose and not kind of, be kind of stiff in what we're doing. Great skill.
100%, man.
Yeah. Third is rough play. What do you mean by rough play, and why is that good to have rough play with children?
Yeah, man. I think rough play starts, I think, from a really early age. I think that's, for dads in particular, which is where I can most relate. That starts with, throwing our kid up in the air, or it's wrestling. My daughter loves wrestling at the moment, so she'll get up onto the sofa like it's the top turnbuckle in WWF, and she'll take me down, and we'll just sort of start to basically get her into a suplex and show her who's boss, basically. But in that moment, while I'm doing a Stone Cold Steve Stunner, there's this release of all these really important chemicals that you're not really conscious of, endorphins and oxytocin and all this good stuff. And actually, what's happening there is is a really strong kind of chemical dance, if you like, that happens between parent and child. But particularly for dads and kids, that's often how roughhousing is sort of how we bond with our children. It's very different to, chemically how it works with mums. And so, that starts at a really early age. And it's a way for our kids to start to understand the limits, and parents to understand the limits for risk as well. Because, dad's never going to hurt me, but he shows me the limits of where that might be. And so it's a really good introduction to risk, essentially. And once you start to extrapolate that out further as they get older, then if that's how, they're feeling about things, then it's probably going to alter how they think about when they go climbing, or when they start, hopping over rocks or crossing streams, or, whatever it might be. So yeah, I think roughhousing from that early age and rough play is a really important sort of foundation for kids, and the way that dads in particular interact with them.
Obviously, it's clear on what you want to do as the method for bringing up children and getting them outdoors and adventuring and adventuring, micro adventures and all this sort of stuff. But what is it that you're really looking to instill in your own children, but also in the future generation? What is it that you hope for these children to have in them as a result of doing these things?
Yeah, I think confidence is a really big one, like really big, like trusting themselves and having that like self confidence. I think that's a really big thing that comes out of, placing children in these environments where they're learning, so loads of good stuff. I think the very act of going on these adventures is stimulating that sense of like curiosity. And I really want my kids to be children who, look at the world in hopefully, in some way, the same way that I do now, which is like, God, if there's anything's possible, and I want to go out there and get it. And so, and I think getting outside is a great way to satisfy and feed that early curiosity. Yeah, I think that trust and confidence is a really big one. And yeah, like make the most of time that we have, the limited time that we have on planet Earth. Like, I don't try to freak them out. Weirdly, my kids have got this really morbid sort of interest in death at the moment, which I'm not sure where that is coming from. But yeah, like they're regularly sort of talking about death just as they nod off to sleep, which is like the worst thing for a 6-year-old to be thinking about. But like having an awareness of like this precious time that we have is really important. I do it. Like I went for a run today, and I often, when I finish a run, I'll walk back through the graveyard in the village. And it sounds weird, but like even just having like a moment to recognize in a really like visceral way that like there's death there, there's gravestones there, that person's life has ended. It's this, as I said, it's maybe that's when my kids get this morbid interest from. But for me, it's like a reminder that that's actually not that far away now, and we need to make the most of it and like jam pack these a few years that we have with with fun and adventure and joyous things. And so if I can instill that in a sort of a child friendly way into my children, I think that's a really strong mentality to have as they start to grow up.
And definitely walk through the graveyard. Don't hop and skip. Otherwise, it's like a showboat that's probably nab you in the arse at some point. Henry, I wanted to finish on the last question on quite a selfish question.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm 26. I want children at some point in the future. Love nature and your particular outlook on bringing up the next generation. But obviously, I don't know what's coming for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's
Yeah.
like unknown unknowns as to what's ahead.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you give advice to me and to younger men going into our future?
Well, I think certainly in the context of like having kids, I definitely am a firm believer in don't do it. No, do it, but don't rush it. Make the most of this time right now to figure some shit out yourself. Like get your own shit sorted before you start, going down the path of bringing others in. You seem to be someone who is, grabbing life by the balls already and realizing that there is some brilliant things to do. And I think you seem to be someone who is going out there and capitalizing on what's out there and learning a lot about yourself in the process. I just think it's so important at this early stage to learn a bit more about yourself. And the only way that you can do that is by, pushing yourself and putting yourself in uncomfortable scenarios, not just like chats on podcasts, but once you get out and, tease yourself, tempt yourself, challenge yourself with things that are going to force learning. I think it's just so important. And then you'll find, within a few years' time that you're, perhaps gathered some maybe some gray hairs on the chin, but some wisdom that is going to help you into that next chapter. So yeah, I'm a big believer in experience and experimentation and getting out there. So yeah, my advice would be to do more of that as much as possible before you get the dreaded phone call from your partner.
Henry, thanks a lot for coming on to the pod, sharing your stories and your wisdom. If there was an example of how to parent, put up there, you're way up there for me. So thanks a lot for what you're doing and for spreading your message, and also just sharing this very wholesome attitude to the world that seems to sometimes be clouded in metrics and money and following, and actually just realizing that a lot of those special moments in life are just walking by a stream that's like 10 minutes down the road from where you live. So yeah, thanks a lot for sharing all of that good stuff and for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me on, Jay. Really enjoyed the chat, and yeah, keep rocking it with the Off Grid podcast. You're doing a great thing.
Rock on, mate. Cheers, Henry.
Cheers, buddy.